Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, for your valuable time on this occasion of the first anniversary of Kuwait liberation. Mr. Prime Minister, almost 1 year after the liberation of Kuwait, Saddam Hussein remains in power, representing a continuing threat to Kuwait and the region in general. Why was the opportunity, Mr. Prime Minister, not taken to oust him from power by pressing home the final attack of the war?
If one goes back to the circumstances of the war just a year ago, the Allied forces were actually operating under the force of a United Nations mandate. And the United Nations mandate was quite clear. It was to expel Saddam Hussein from Kuwait and liberate Kuwait. It wasn't to go further than that. And it was on that basis that there was such overwhelming international support for the operation. I suspect, even in retrospect, that if we had gone further than that, that international support would have fallen away. And I think the right decision, therefore, was taken.
Do you feel Saddam should be brought to trial as a criminal of war by the United Nations?
Well, we don't have him in our hands. So at the moment, that's a hypothetical question. I think the nature of his regime and the crimes he committed stand on the book for everyone to see.
How do you feel about the future of the region? Will another war break out? How do you foresee world relationships with a post-Saddam Iraq?
Well, I look forward to a post-Saddam Iraq. I think that is the first point to make. It is a very important region of the world, and it's one where it is perhaps more important than in many other areas that we have a proper stability. One manifestation of that, of course, is the immense concern that is felt amongst the United Nations members to ensure that the nuclear weapons that exist in Iraq are dismantled. The Commission will continue its work, and we're determined that that will go on until those weapons have been removed. That, I believe, will add to the stability in the region.
In direct violation of post-war agreements and international conventions, Saddam Hussein continues to hold many Kuwaiti hostages in inhuman conditions. What efforts, Mr. Prime Minister, is Britain making, either independently or in concert with fellow members of the Security Council, to expedite their early release?
Well, most of our activities, of course, are through the international fora and essentially through the United Nations. But what we want to see is perfectly clear. We want all those hostages released and back home with their families as soon as possible. That's where they should be, and there is no legality whatsoever in their continuing detention. Iraq knows very clearly that that is our view.
What more do you feel could be done?
Well, I think we can only pursue it in the way we are. The United Nations are very active. That is the right forum. And we have, of course, seen over the last year the enormous success that the United Nations has had in wrinkling out hostages, even from the most unlikely sources. We will keep a continuing international pressure on Iraq for a number of reasons. And one of the most important reasons, of course, is to get those Kuwaiti hostages back with their families where they belong.
The collapse of the Soviet Union has in effect created a new world order, leaving the United States as the sole superpower. How do you see, Mr. Prime Minister, Britain's role in the new order?
Well, we are, of course, a member of the Permanent Five on the Security Council, and it was in that capacity I called the first Heads of Government meeting at the Security Council in the whole of its history just a short while ago. So we will exercise the authority we have as a member of the Security Council to see what can be done to maintain the best possible international relations. But more than that, of course, as a leading member of the European community, we have an increasingly close relationship both with Russia and with the new republics in the former Soviet Union. And President Yeltsin was here in Downing Street just a few weeks ago when we increased our bilateral relationship substantially and agreed upon the first treaty between Britain and Russia within the last 200 years. So we're taking a very leading role to bring Russia and the other republics back into the international community.
What view do you take of the newly independent nations, and in particular of the threat of the consequent nuclear proliferation?
We're in close touch with the republics. We have recognized most of the republics, so we have diplomatic relations with them. And both with our partners, the United Nations and the European community, we are stressing repeatedly that there must be a proper control of nuclear weapons, both the strategic nuclear weapons and the sub-strategic nuclear weapons. That is also the view of President Yeltsin, and he's in close touch with the presidents of the other republics in order that these nuclear weapons can be brought under a safe umbrella. It's in everyone's interest that will happen, and we are cooperating with him very closely to that end.
The Middle East, Mr. Prime Minister, is in a state of flux on a number of fronts. What role is Britain playing in the Middle East talks? Are you in direct communication with the PLO and Israel?
Well, our role principally is through the European community. At the moment, we are one of the Troika, one of the three members that either hold the presidency, have just held it, or are about to hold it. In our case, we are about to become president. So our role is primarily, not wholly, but primarily through the European community Troika. And what we wish to see is those talks continue and conclude so that one of the running sores that has bedeviled the Middle East for so long can be solved.
Do you anticipate the establishment of a Palestinian state reflecting their rights, which Britain has already recognized?
Well, we've long recognized the desirability of self-determination for the Palestinians, and also, of course, the right of Israel to exist behind secure borders. Both of those are necessary for long-term stability in the region. Whether the negotiations between the interested parties produces a Palestinian state as such or not is a matter for the negotiations, but self-determination for the Palestinians must surely be right.
What is Britain's stand on Israel continuing establishing and expanding its settlements?
Well, our position on that has been clear for some time. We don't think it's helpful to the settlement of the dispute in the Middle East, and Israel know that.
Mr. Prime Minister, the European community has become a significant economic and political reality on the world map. How do you view the opportunities for a closer future relationship between the EC and the GCC countries?
Well, I think it's a very desirable development. The Gulf Cooperation Council is important. I believe it will become increasingly important. And as a very wide economic grouping, I think the European community should maintain the closest possible relationship with the GCC, and I'm sure it will.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, for your valuable time.
Thank you.